They called me useless for so long that I almost believed it. But the night my brother's son and my daughter-in-law smashed open the wrong safe in my basement, covering themselves in indelible blue dye while a camera watched, I stepped from the shadows and said, "You planned an accident for me. I planned consequences for you." The last thing they heard before the police arrived was my voice, clear, steady, unforgiving. It was the sound of a grandfather who finally stopped paying for his own humiliation. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 74 years old, a widower, and a grandfather to 2 children who still have the good sense to tell the truth when it matters. My name is Gerald. I am the man who answers at 2 in the morning, the man who shows up with a wrench and a ladder and a checkbook. I carried my son's first crib up 2 flights of stairs, then carried his first mortgage for 6 years. When my only brother, Paul, blew out his shoulder and, temporary, turned into 2 unworking decades, I carried his groceries, his rent, and his pride. My hands have the map of all the favors I have done, old cuts silvered over, calluses baked into the skin. I did not resent it. That is not how I was raised. You do for family, and you do not keep score. But other people did. My son, David, learned to measure tenderness in dollars because I made it too easy. When his wife, Ruth, married into our family, she grew comfortable on the cushion of my support and called it her own. And my brother never learned to say thank you in the 20 years he leaned on me. His wife, Sandra, learned to call me whenever Paul did not want to, which was often. Their boy, my nephew Kevin, learned to smile like he meant it only when my wallet was open. It did not start with cruelty. It started with jokes. "Old man," Ruth would say with a bright laugh, when I brought over the new faucet David could not afford. "You really should not lift heavy things anymore. You will break a hip and cost us all a fortune." The words would roll off her tongue as if they were harmless. Then I would catch David watching me with that look, mild embarrassment, quickly swallowed by a shrug. In the months that followed, "Old man" turned into our walking expense report, and I laughed because it was easier to laugh than to ask my own child why he had allowed it. At Paul's table, the jokes were rougher. "Here comes the bank," Sandra would call, and everyone would ask how much the bank brought. When I bought my brother new tires after the second flat in 2 months, he slapped my shoulder and said, "You do love to feel needed, do you not?" Kevin grinned across the table and added, "Do not worry, Uncle G. We will keep you important." They laughed. I kept my hands wrapped around the coffee mug so they would not see that I was clenching my fists. I do not drink much, but on the night it changed, I poured myself a small bourbon and sipped in the quiet. The house has been quieter since my wife, Lila, died. Grief had the decency to be honest. The living did not. The change arrived as a whisper. My granddaughter, Tessa, is 9 years old and has my wife's careful eyes. She is the kind of child who watches before she speaks. "Grandpa," she said, tugging my sleeve at her birthday party, when the frosting had hardened on paper plates and the adults' voices had grown sharp in the kitchen. "Can I tell you a secret if it is for safety?" I went down on one knee because I learned long ago that eyes should meet at the same height for serious things. "You can tell me anything, little bird." She glanced toward the kitchen, where Ruth and Sandra stood too close together for comfort, whispering through lifted wine glasses. "Aunt Sandra said Mom will help fix your car problem if you keep refusing to sign the paper." I heard her say it. A car problem like the one that made Mr. Landry's car go down the hill. She laughed. It did not sound like a joke. She placed her hand flat over her chest and whispered, "I keep secrets at school. But not bad ones. I have been many kinds of man across 74 years, soldier, plumber, husband, father, widower. In that moment I became exactly what my wife had always trusted I would be if danger ever came by our door, calm as a winter lake and as cold. "Thank you," I said. "You did exactly right." I sent Tessa to fetch me a slice of cake. Then I stood in the kitchen and listened. I did not need to press my ear to the wall to catch what Ruth said next. "He signs this week," Ruth hissed, voice low with anger. "Either he finally leaves the house to David for tax reasons, or he keeps pretending he is immortal, and we work around him. Sandra, I am serious. I have no patience left. He is handing money to charity when he could keep it in a family. He is senile. He is stubborn," Sandra answered. "There is a difference. You want those properties to pass to another foundation so Gerald feels noble in heaven while we scramble." Ruth spat. "Paul has waited long enough. We all have." Sandra's sigh was a snake slipping back into the grass. "Kevin has an idea. If Gerald's car has trouble, the old will falls to probate with no charitable amendments. The state will lean conservative. Family first. We have the hospital paperwork. It will be like when Lila passed. Quiet, fast. An accident," Ruth said softly. "That is all." I felt the bourbon turn to iron in my throat. A minute earlier I had been a grandfather at a birthday party. Now I was a problem to be solved by two women who had eaten my food and let me hold their children while they went to the spa. Tessa came back with cake. I smiled at her with the part of me that still felt human. Then I put my plate down and made the sort of calls that change the ending of a story. You learn a lot in a lifetime if you pay attention. I had paid for 100 mistakes, mine and other people's. I was done financing everyone else's poor planning. That night was the start of my plan, and it began with a simple rule: believe people when they tell you who they are. And design accordingly. First, I moved the money out of their reach. Not by theatrics and not by malice, by law. I had the deed to my house split, and then I placed my interest into a trust built like a knot sailors would respect. The successor trustees were not my son and not my brother. They were two men I had known since army days and a woman I had known since she ran the nurse's desk when Lila was sick. The beneficiaries were clear: college accounts for my grandchildren, a scholarship in my wife's name for nursing students over 40 returning to school, and a veterans housing fund in a neighborhood where I had installed almost every water heater on that block by hand. I reserved a life estate for the house. I could live and die inside these walls, and not an inch of timber could pass without those children and that fund being taken care of first. Second, I placed everything that could be replaced behind glass, and everything that could not behind decoys. The safe in the basement they knew, the old, black, handsome thing with a spin dial and a marred brass handle, held a few old tax returns, a forged copy of my will, and a die packed the color of a summer sky. It would do what it was made to do if someone forced it. But the true safe sat flush with the wall behind the shelf of my plumbing manuals that no one else thought to touch. It was newer, heavier, and invisible unless you knew which biography of John Muir made a hidden latch. Third, I made a record because my father taught me that men who are too proud to write things down often end up dead in other people's versions of their lives. I bought 3 cameras, each small enough to hide in my hat rack, my multi-tool drawer, and the light fixture over the basement stairs. A 4th went under the eave. I told my neighbor's boy to test them by coming over and, forgetting, a package on my porch. The recordings were clear enough to count eyelashes. I put the memory cards inside the true safe and gave copies to my friend Nate, who carried a badge for 32 years and knew which detectives still cared. Finally, I pretended to stumble. If thieves watch you long enough, they get bored. If you stumble, they hurry. I let Ruth see a stack of medical bills on my kitchen table and a pamphlet tucked in among them about estate planning, keeping it simple. I let Sandra watch me put a new key into my pocket and said, I cannot for the life of me remember which safe it belongs to. I let David hear me sigh when I stood up too fast. I let Paul find me by accident at the pharmacy choosing a pill organizer. When he asked if he should help me sort the week, I looked grateful enough to break a heart that still had any softness left. What is all this for, Gerald? Paul asked, voice a little too casual to be casual. You cannot take it with you, you know. I know, I said gently. I am deciding who gets what before I am gone and before anyone decides for me. Paul nodded with the automatic dignity of a younger brother who has practiced looking concerned and has forgotten how it feels. Do not leave David out. He has a family. So does your son, I said. And I have seen both families' hands. He laughed then, as if I had made a joke. He patted my shoulder. The old familiarity of that touch made my stomach turn. Sometimes justice requires an opening night. Mine was a Saturday. The weather had turned in a way that made the air smell like damp earth and last year's leaves. I invited everyone to my house for a family dinner that was, in truth, a test of my scaffolding. I cooked because Lila would have wanted it done properly. Roast chicken. Potatoes. Green beans with lemon. Apple crisp because it was Tessa's favorite, and I wanted something good to happen that evening for her. They arrived in a stagger that told me more than I needed to know. Ruth and David came early to help. Paul and Sandra came late with the sort of apologies that are mostly complaints. Kevin appeared between them, leaning against the doorframe like a thought he would rather not finish. I handed out napkins. I poured water. I did not pour wine. They noticed. I am sure they assumed I did not want to risk a late-night drive. I kept the conversation on old things. Fishing. The year we lost power for 4 days and kept a winter picnic in the living room by the fireplace. The way Lila would sing while she baked and never hit a wrong note. I watched the nerves loosen in their faces as the night turned ordinary. When the dishes were cleared and the children put to cartoons in the back room, I stood with my coffee and told them what they wanted to hear badly enough to stop watching how they moved. I had been sorting through papers, I said, as if the thought had just arrived, and not as if I had rehearsed those 12 words with Nate so that I would not say more. It is time to make things easier on everyone. Ruth practically shone. Sandra smoothed her blouse like a cat about to pounce. Paul folded his hands. David looked relieved but also tired in a way that made me ache despite myself. I had forgiven him for 1,000 small betrayals because I remembered the child he had been. That was the problem with being a father. You cannot forget who you watched sleeping. I would like to show you where the important documents are, I continued. In case anything happens. You could have cut the eagerness in that room with a butter knife. I led them to the basement. I took us down slowly, one hand on the rail because that is how an older man goes downstairs, and I was playing a role. Right there, I said, patting the old black safe like an animal I trusted. Everything you would need if something unexpected occurs. Will, titles, and a list of accounts. And the key. I reached into my pocket, and my fingers closed around the key I had shown Paul at the pharmacy earlier in the week. The basement camera caught the way Ruth leaned forward. The Eve camera had already captured Kevin sitting in the car 15 minutes before the dinner, on his phone, facing my driveway, watching. I did not give them the key. Not yet. I let it drop back into my pocket with a little fumble and a chuckle. In the morning, I said. After breakfast. I can think straight better after a cup of coffee. A thinner smile flickered across Ruth's face, there and gone. Sandra placed a hand on my arm and squeezed. Of course, Gerald, she said sweetly. We will talk in the morning. I slept lightly that night with the satisfaction of a man who knows the door is locked and the window latch is strong. At 2:13 a.m. The camera in the hat rack watched David move down the hallway like a ghost. At 2:18, the basement light warmed, then died, then warmed again. Someone had learned which switch controlled which fixture by letting their fingers find the wrong one first. At 2:19, the old safe took a new insult. When the die exploded, the scream that rose through the floor startled even me. It is a hell of a thing to hear a woman who has laughed at you for years finally find a note she cannot maintain. It was followed by curses, Ruth's voice, then a hiss of someone trying to shush her. The shushing sounded like Kevin. I walked downstairs and turned on the overhead light properly. Ruth's face looked like she had slept in a puddle of paint. Kevin's forearms blew up to the elbows. Sandra's blouse had a constellation across the chest, as if a cruel child had flicked a brush for fun. David stood a little apart, his hands clean, his face white. What did you think you would find? I asked. Ruth wiped at her face, which only made it worse. It is your fault, she snapped, breathless. You set a trap. I did, I said. That is what a man does when he hears that his family plans to cut his brake line. Tessa told me exactly what she heard. She saved my life tonight. The cameras will save my good name tomorrow. They looked at the light fixture then, all of them. It takes a certain kind of person to realize he is recorded only after the recording matters. Kevin's throat worked like he was trying to swallow a rock. Sandra opened and closed her mouth like a caught fish. Ruth lowered her hands and lifted her chin with that stubborn pride that made me dislike her rather than pity her. You cannot prove we were going to do anything, she said. We were just checking. Checking what? I asked. Whether I would die quietly. Whether a dignity I paid for would cover your desire to control what you did not build. I took the key from my pocket and turned toward the bookshelf with my plumbing manuals. My fingers slid John Muir to the left. The shelf popped. I opened the true safe and removed a stack of photographs and a little box that held the memory cards. The photographs were new. The dates stamped in the corner were interview honest and unforgiving. In the images were Ruth and Kevin in my garage 3 nights earlier, lifting my hood. There was a shot of Kevin studying the brake lines with the kind of attention he has never given a human being. There was Ruth holding a small utility knife. In another photo, taken from the eve, Paul stood at the edge of my porch 2 days earlier with Sandra's voice audible as she asked whether my old wind chimes had kept me up at night. That was her trick for white noise. She wanted to know how deep I slept. She asked with her voice pitched to kindness. The camera picked up both the words and the tone. You put cameras in your house. David whispered, but it was not accusation I heard. It was something like relief. Yes, I said. I finally mounted the only fixtures that matter. Then I did something that I knew would make them hurt where they believe they cannot be touched. I invited them upstairs, washed, and back to the kitchen table. I made more coffee. I poured it slowly into my wife's favorite mugs. I set the photographs in a neat row. I placed the memory cards in a little stack you could mistake for chocolate until you looked closely. I let the silence stretch until it threatened to snap. "Here is what happens next," I said, voice as simple as I could make it. "You will all listen. You will not interrupt. You have interrupted me for years. That part of our lives is over." For once, they listened. "You have mocked me for being soft," I said. "You mistook love for weakness and patience for permission. You called me the bank, the expense report, the old man. You planned a way to turn that into money the minute my heart or my brakes failed. You forgot that someone who can build a life can also build a plan." I slid a copy of the trust summary across the table. It included the letter from my lawyer that spelled out, in neat, modest language, the parts of my estate that had already moved beyond the reach of a probate judge. There is no music in legal prose, but in that letter I heard a quiet, comforting hymn. The beneficiaries were names that made me feel like I had done something that would last. "You have already lost," I said. "After my life ends, the house will stay with me until my last day and then become scholarship and shelter. The rental properties will fund the nursing students and the Veterans Housing Fund. The accounts are held by trustees who do not care about your temper. They only care about the instructions written in this letter. You will never find a judge who will undo it for you." Sandra's mouth pinched. "You are cruel," she whispered. "You would do this to family." "I would do this for family," I said softly, "which includes children who did not ask to be born into this ugliness. It includes Lila's good name. It includes the people I promised to help in her honor when she took her last breath in my arms and told me to spend the rest of my life being the kind of man she married." Paul stared at the table, not at me. When he finally spoke, his voice was a rasp. "Gerald, you cannot call the police. We are family. You and I share blood," I said. "That is not the same as sharing values." I did not enjoy what came next. Enjoyment is the wrong word for something that feels like necessary surgery. I called Nate and told him it was time. He arrived with an officer who had enough gray in his hair to understand what he was walking into. They treated me like a victim of a crime because that is what I was. They treated my family like suspects because that is what they were. I did not ask for handcuffs in front of the children. I asked the officers to see them out through the back and sit them in cars without lights. The officers nodded and made it happen as gently as the law allows. David did something I had not expected. He stood between Ruth and the door when the officer gestured. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. He only looked at his wife and spoke in a tone I had not heard from him since he was a teenager and decided to tell the truth about a broken window. "Enough," he said. Ruth flinched as if he had spit at her. "Are you going to side with him now?" "I am going to side with my children," he said, and even Ruth heard the end of that sentence, because someone needs to. When they were gone and the house fell into the kind of silence that feels like a real thing you could lift, I sat down and let the weight of the night work through me. Grief does not always come when someone dies. Sometimes it comes when a fantasy does. Nate poured me more coffee. He did not tell me that I had done the right thing. I did not need him to. I had needed witnesses more than I needed comfort. There would be charges for Kevin and Ruth, attempted sabotage, attempted burglary, conspiracy. There would be a hearing for Paul and Sandra because the recordings caught more than jokes and less than a plan with signatures. The law would do what it could. The law is imperfect and, in my town, not as easily bent by people like us as some think. The diversion I created did something else I had counted on. It made greed turn inward. In the days that followed, Kevin told investigators that Ruth had pushed the plan to speed up, that she had put the knife in his hand with the charm of a woman feeding a songbird. Ruth insisted that Kevin was unstable and that she had gone to the basement to stop him. Sandra said she had been in the powder room and could not possibly be part of anything, though my Eve camera politely disagreed. Paul said nothing in public and sent me a letter that tried to be apology and landed closer to accounting. Meanwhile, the two people who mattered stumbled through the wreckage with their eyes open. Tessa kept drawing pictures of houses with big sunflowers in the yard and a dog that looked like a loaf of bread with legs. My grandson Eli asked if grown-ups could get in timeouts, and I told him yes, and that sometimes the benches are made of wood and attached to walls. David called me every morning for a week, not to ask for money, but to ask how I slept. We spoke like men who have chosen to rebuild rather than pretend nothing fell. I should have stopped it, he said on the third morning. I should have seen it. I heard the jokes and let them pass. I should have stopped a lot of things, I said. This is where we start. You do not fix rot in a house by painting the porch. He laughed then. Not a joyful laugh. A real one. There was one more thing to do. I owed my brother something old men do not often give to each other because it takes too much courage. I owed him a choice. He came by a week after the arrests with his shoulders hunched like a man bracing for rain. He had lost the easy smile. It did not look like grief yet. It looked like a man realizing that he had walked his family into a wall he should have seen. I did not invite him inside. We sat on the porch because truth wears better in open air. I will not put you on the stand to destroy you, I said plainly. I am not here to make you beg. But I will not shelter you. You chose your choices. If a prosecutor calls, you will answer. If your son needs a lawyer, you will pay him from your pocket. My hand is no longer open for that. It will be open only for the children. He nodded like a man who has heard a verdict. I am sorry, he whispered. Say it to Tessa, I said. Say it to yourself. Then do something about it that has nothing to do with me. He looked at the edge of the porch rather than at me. You have always thought you were better than me. I did not take the bait. I have always thought I could do better next time. This time I am right. We sat a little longer. He left without asking for money. He would ask again before the year was out. I would say no unless the request had a child's name attached to it, and then the answer would be yes, but through a third party whose books are audited. Love can be measured better than money when you stop pretending it cannot. I changed the locks. I called the locksmith's boy because he needed the work. That boy will attend community college in the fall on a scholarship grant in my wife's name funded by a line I added to the trust that week. He did not know that when he fit the new deadbolt. He only knew that an old man tipped well and said thank you like he meant it. By the time summer turned, the court dates had painted lines down the calendar. Ruth was out on bond and furious that anger did not work on everyone. Kevin had already found religion or the kind of repentance people try on when the cell door clicks. Sandra's appointment for a deposition was set for a Tuesday at 9. Paul was the kind of quiet that comes when the soundtrack of your life stops playing and you are not sure if you want to turn it back on. On a Wednesday evening in July, I drove to the little park where my grandchildren like to run until they fall into the grass with the honest exhaustion that looks like prayer if you squint. Tessa ran up and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. I wrote something, she said, and she looked nervous for the first time since the night she saved me. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was the neat, careful script of a child who wants to do it right. It said, Dear Grandpa, I am happy you stayed alive. You make roast chicken and you let us color on the placemats and you never tell me I am a burden. I do not know what a trust is. But I know what trust is. I trust you. Love, Tessa. I am a man who has lifted bathtubs by himself and bumped them downstairs 1 hard inch at a time. I have pulled a 60-gallon water heater out of a crawlspace without help because the snow was coming and the family needed hot water by nightfall. None of that weighed what that letter did in my palm. You did the bravest thing, I said. You told the truth. She nodded and then went to push Eli on the swings. The evening light cut long, kind shadows across the playground. A breeze lifted the hair at my temple the way Lila used to when she pushed it back to kiss my forehead. There are 1,000 ways to end a story like mine. Some men would blow up their lives to blow up someone else's. Some men would go quiet and so small that the world would not notice until the house went up for sale and the lawn went brown. I wanted a different ending. I wanted to raise a fence that keeps what matters in and what does not out, without making a prison of my heart. I did not rebuild the family. That is not how this works. You do not drag rotten beams inside a new frame and call it safe because you are tired. But I built a place my grandchildren can grow upright. I wrote letters that matter more than apologies. I put my wife's name on grants that will outlast whatever anyone thinks of me. I chose to stop being a man who powers other people's bad decisions and started being a man who invests in good ones. People love stories where the wrongdoers weep and the wronged man forgives them because he is too tired to fight. That is not this story. The wrongdoers faced charges. The wronged man faced himself. Months later, when the cases had moved through the courts and the neighborhood had found new gossip to chew, there was a knock at my door. It was Ruth. She stood with a paper sack and the sort of smile people wear when they have practiced in the mirror. I baked, she said. I would like to say I am sorry. I looked at the sack, then at her. You are welcome to apologize, I said. You are not welcome to come in. She held the sack tighter. I am sober now. I am glad, I said. My sobriety began the night I stopped believing my love would make you decent. She flinched and recovered. You are cruel. No, I said. I am clear. She swallowed and nodded once. The children would like to see you. David says we can arrange a schedule where. David can call me himself, I said. He has my number. He has my trust when his actions earn it. She left with the paper sack and her practiced smile chipped. I closed the door and leaned my hand flat against it. That is how you hold a boundary in place when the person on the other side of it has spent years pushing. In the end, the plan that saved me was not the dye pack or the cameras or the cleverly hidden safe, though I am grateful for cleverness and the men who carry badges for the right reasons. The plan that saved me was the simplest one we forget because it does not make noise. Decide what you value. Write it down. Defend it with both hands. I used to think revenge was a hot slash of satisfaction. It is not. It is the quiet of a house where the locks have been changed for the safety of the people inside. It is a little girl handing you a letter that says she trusts you and knowing you did the work to deserve it. It is your son calling to ask for your advice instead of your credit card.
Greetings, and thanks for spending your time with us today. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. I want to wish you a peaceful day or a restful evening, wherever you may be. Take care, and we'll see you next time.